Hello, I'm just setting myself a timer for 20 minutes. Let's see how I go today with keeping the duration of this broadcast down. It should be pithy, it should be interesting. We should be able to get through the numerous topics with speed. So, how's everybody doing? We're in a fight for democracy's life, not only in the United States, but in other Western countries as well. We're contending with people who sometimes call themselves Western chauvinists, like the Proud Boys who are today amassing in Portland, having threatened to cause violence on numerous occasions. The governor has declared a state of emergency, and there's an anti-racist rally a few miles away. It's to be hoped that nobody loses their life today. Fingers crossed. Not that fingers crossing or prayers will do anything particularly to alter the outcomes of today, but it is to be hoped that public pressure at some point might stop at least more people from joining the ranks of the Proud Boys, a white supremacist group that also attracts people of color. It has a philosophy that welcomes everybody in, provided they accept the philosophy of white supremacy. So you can have differently colored skin and internalize racism, but still join the Proud Boys, be a man, and they'll accept you and indeed embrace you and your useful diversity. Hello, Mr. Ed. Hello, Mark. Hello, Kavanagh. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Michelle Stargal. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Destiny's mum. It's Tony, isn't it? Nice to see you. Marsha. Thank you, Marsha. Well, this seems to be a good time for people to convene. Nice that you're all on board. I've heard some great terms that I'd like to share with you. Carol Cadwalla, who's a British journalist who's been reporting on Facebook how it's basically like an out-of-control nation equivalent to North Korea that has been conducting unchecked sabotage and subversion of democracy in Western nations, starting with the UK, where they helped to subvert the outcome for Brexit, which is a referendum, as you may know, on whether or not the UK should stay within the European Union and all of their powerful trading alliances. Instead, people were subjected to very targeted propaganda. And I say propaganda, meaning that it wasn't true information. It was just information tailored to their psychological profile as determined by data scientists from Cambridge Analytica and their co-conspirators in Russia, analyzing people's likes and dislikes and then tailoring lies to help them believe that that would be a great thing. And once you've made someone believe a lie, you also get them very heavily invested in defending that lie as true and useful and important, because people don't readily like to admit mistakes. So something I'm just going to make a little bit bigger at the moment is a story from the New York Times that points out that Trump is facing an electoral challenge in that he's fairly predictably struggling in a lot of different states, including in red states. Now, I don't think Trump anticipated this, because during the Ebola crisis of 2014, the fear of infection made red states more red. Now, this has been determined by psychologists who evaluated the fallout of the Ebola crisis. When people were afraid of infection, they were more likely to vote for a conservative politician if they were already conservative leaning. So it increased voter turnout against Obama. But the thing with COVID that makes it different from Ebola is it's not a threat. You don't have to fear contamination from overseas. It doesn't amplify your racism in that way, because Trump already sought to profit from COVID by pretending it wasn't real. So people who are conservative aren't responding in a particularly threatened way to COVID. It's not exacerbating their racism, it's exacerbating their ability to cling to delusions. Yes, And the difficult thing with Amy Coney Barrett is that it's quite possibly an unstoppable force, that we possibly can't do anything about it, but that it will be another factor increasing turnout for Democrats in all likelihood, because there are still lots of pro-choice Republican women who at least may be less motivated to turn out to reward a president who is seen by many as acting in an unseemly fashion by nominating someone before Ruth Bader Ginsburg is in the ground. Now, Trump's whole shtick, one of his major appeals to his base, is that he horrifies people and he upsets people and he makes the libs cry. So they know there's some benefit in behaving inappropriately in terms of sustaining the enthusiasm for their base, who have had an appetite whetted and created for cruelty. But Trump needs more than just his base to win an election. He needs the rest of the passive, onlooking Republicans to just still go, well, I can't conceive of voting for Democrats, so I'll do what I normally do as a good Republican and vote for the Republican candidate. I'll say, oh, well, I don't like his twittering, but, he's a Republican and the Democrats are the devil. But as Maddow pointed out on her show, it would seem that the strategy of the Republican Party at the moment is focused on getting a judge to make the balance of the Supreme Court 6-3, and then just framing the election as if it's a court case. I mean, Lindsey Graham said, yes, no, the election's going to be decided by the courts. And of course we'll accept that, and then there'll be a appropriate transfer of power. It's like, why would we accept that? Why should it be something people just accept in this moment as having any merit to it? The argument that the election will be determined in the courts. There is no evidence Trump can produce to say there's a problem with mail-in ballots or absentee ballots, and his own FBI director has gone under oath and said that there is not any evidence of problems with that type of voting, mail-in ballots or absentee ballots. Multiple states have been doing it for a long time, and there's no mechanism of fraud. There's no instances of fraud. And then, of course, you had an attorney general whip up a statement and then revise it about 9 ballots that had been cast for Trump in the primary and discarded. Turns out it was 7 ballots for Trump. They were only opened because the wrong envelope was used. You're supposed to have the outer privacy envelope, and they didn't have that envelope, meaning their ballots were misinterpreted as ballot requests, so staff opened it. And this is because of a Republican insistence that ballots that aren't in the security envelope not be processed and be challenged. Yes, and last time Trump didn't expect to win the election either. So he was already paving the ground for a challenge, in that he could try and glean the sympathy of people who were like, yes, he's the hero of the hour, so we'll definitely pay to watch Trump TV because Trump was robbed. Oh, look, I've got a troll. Well, thank you, troll. I'm Dav, so thanks for appearing on our broadcast. I'm trying a new system of responding to trolls today. I read an article about it that said a lot of them just want attention and to be, acknowledged as human. So thanks for joining in. We do have boundaries, and if you can't abide by them, then we do have a lot of moderators who will mute them. So if you just degenerate into unsubstantiated personal attacks, then no, we don't encourage that and we don't tolerate it for very long. But yeah, I work with evidence and I report on facts, and I play clips to support what I'm saying as well. I don't truck with unsubstantiated stuff, although I do conduct analysis as well. Luke's also claiming to have 5 mail-in ballots. Do you have 5 mail-in ballots, Luke? Lucky Luke. Or do you have some mail-in ballot requests? even if you did have 5 mail-in ballots, you have to sign them, you have to put them in envelopes, and they're tallied in the same way they would be in-person voting, tallied against your name. They mark off in the same way that you can track what happens to your ballot after you drop it off in a drop box or at an electoral county. You can track the progress of your ballot. So too can election officials keep track of the fact that you voted. No, I would argue that Russia didn't hack the 2018 midterms necessarily. I can't conclusively say that either way. I'm not a cybersecurity official. But I know that the blue wave was not something that Donald Trump wanted. Do you know what? Luke's probably deriving some kind of happiness from the ability to engage with others. And he has that Trumpian adversarial mindset of, I'm going to go attack people and they're going to validate my existence and give me something to feel like I'm winning. And that has been the trouble with Facebook, which is all of the Russian and Cambridge Analytica collaboration on psychographic micro-targeting. Means they used all of people's personality data that they freely gave to Facebook when they did things like, and I did these too, filled out personality quizzes that told me how conscientious I was, different personality traits, what our scores were. They used that and they found people who scored highly on Machiavellianism and narcissism and antisocial tendencies, particularly Bernie supporters. And they targeted these people with campaign ads that were shadow ads, as in only you saw them. They weren't obvious to other people on your Facebook who might visit your Facebook page, and then they disappeared after the election as well. So very precise, very shaped, a very abusive and psychological warfare use of data. 50 million Americans, or is it 80? It was a lot, wasn't it? A lot of people had their data used abusively in this way, in this illegitimate way. And Obama had learned to harvest data as well, but not in a collaboration with a firm that's not American, that was also collaborating with a hostile adversarial foreign power, namely Russia. Sweetie, none of your allegations are substantiated. I'm still here dealing with facts, so excuse me for not giving you the attention you crave right at the moment. I have to switch to actually look at some of the evidence again and some of the statistics. So where Trump is failing at the moment is in Iowa, Georgia, and Texas because he's losing ground. So let's have a look at Iowa, which Trump won by 9 points. Biden's now leading by 3 points. That's Iowa. Georgia, Trump won by 5 points and is now statistically tied. Texas, Trump won by 9 points, and that lead has been reduced by 7. It's 6. It's now down to 3 points at a Trump lead. So you could potentially call that a statistical tie as well within the margin of error. And the reason for this is not that much that men are substantively changing their mind, but a lot of women are changing their minds. Then I would say that's a product of their lived experience. Women are often much more connected to health outcomes for their family. Women are more connected to the possibility that if they're pregnant and they have to go to hospital for a difficult or birth complications, they might not be able to go with a loved one because hospitals that are experiencing high rates of COVID admissions restrict visitors. So women are more attuned to this, and also women are more likely to feel themselves to be in charge of family health outcomes. They're often more concerned about, how will we provide healthcare outcomes for children? Because women do a lot of the emotional labor of looking ahead for families. Now, I'll say that men do a lot of the emotional labor of worrying more broadly about how to provide for families, But that's a generalization that can take a lot of beating from reality, because there's still a lot of female heads of households, a lot of single parents, and a lot of families where women might be the significant breadwinner, particularly in cases where people have lost their jobs as a result of this under-responded to COVID pandemic. And I'm going to argue that Trump willfully seeded this virus in California, and I'll produce some evidence to support my hypothesis, which isn't something that's addressed or confirmed by the media, but you can all have a look at a whistleblower's report from the Department of Health and Human Services, because they reported in February that multiple staff members, 13 in one case and 14 in another case, were sent to air bases, one Travis Air Base and one March Air Base near Solano, California, and that they were sent without adequate training or protective gear, and that this was highlighted to them because of the contrast with CDC staff members who turned up in full hazmat gear, and they were there greeting repatriated Americans coming from Wuhan. So even though Trump pretends that he executed this watertight travel ban, he didn't really. He repatriated a lot of Americans from China. 40,000 people were allowed still to travel from China to the US after his so-called ban was instituted. So no, he didn't really institute a ban. And with a disease as contagious and as covertly spread as COVID-19, and when I say covertly, I'm referring, of course, to its nature, that it can be spread by asymptomatic carriers, particularly young people who have a very mild case, but are capable of passing it on through the community. And when it eventually reaches people in trapped populations, such as nursing home residents, veterans nursing home residents, jail inhabitants, and asylum seeker detention centers, that's when you do start to see the mass casualties arise. Because if you're trapped and you aren't equipped with masks, you might receive a large infective dose of viral particles because you are going to be exposed to the same people for protracted periods of time. And the likelihood of getting a severe case of COVID-19, outside of personal factors like your own immune system or your age or the number of comorbidities you have, the likelihood of gaining a severe case is time, exposure as a consequence of prolonged time of being exposed to somebody who's infective, and so how close you are to them, how much time, and what type of activities they're doing, because even speech and breathing aerosolizes your respiratory droplets, but of course singing and yelling increases the acceleration of and propulsion of your respiratory droplets, so that makes it more likely that a full force infective dose will be delivered right into the mucosal linings of whoever's being yelled at or sung near. Choirs keep people attending choirs without masks on. It's just a bad idea to participate in a choir at all at the moment, unless it's an online choir. Do you know what? I'm not going to argue with you that President Xi is a murderous dictator, because you know what, he is. And there's very big concentration camps being built in addition to the pre-existing concentration camps in areas of China where they are detaining millions of Uyghur Muslims. But of course, Hitler was notable for weaponizing pre-existing community levels of anti-Semitism and making it seem like Jewish people were this big and immediate threat to Germany, to its prosperity and stability, by pretending that all Jews were communists, by publishing, much like Fox News, but by publishing a weekly list that highlighted any crimes committed by Jewish Germans, to undermine the idea that Jewish Germans could conceivably be considered loyal to Germany or could be considered valuable citizens. No, they always had to be associated with crime. People from every demographic commit crimes, but tyrants, autocrats, fascists like Hitler and like Trump do their best to increase the significance and increase the emotional salience of any crime committed by someone from a demographic that's already stigmatized and that whose stigma they are weaponizing. What was the oh my God for? Or was that about China and you didn't know? Yes. No, I can say that Obama and his administration also had ICE operate during their tenure, and they probably felt like it was a conciliatory move towards conservatives who often claim to be afraid of America being undermined by undocumented migration. And they had surges of undocumented children turning up unaccompanied at the border. So those children were detained. And yes, those detention facilities have wire in them and look like cages, which is why I always try and encourage people not to just complain that children were in cages, because that wasn't a departure from the Obama administration, even though that had more limited timeframes of detaining children whilst their asylum claims were being processed to see if they could be reunited with relatives already in America or if their asylum claims would be rejected and they would be deported back to their home countries, because America doesn't accept all applicants for asylum. But in Trump's case, he didn't just cage children, he stole children who hadn't turned up at the border unaccompanied, as 14-year-olds who'd made the trek, or come most of the way with family members and then left them at the border and journeyed the final part by themselves. He took family units and forcibly separated them in order to create such trauma amongst the parents and amongst the separated children, including tender age infants, breastfeeding babies that were separated from their parents, in order to intimidate, to ruin these migrants, to ruin their sanity and their psychological health so irreparably that the story would get out and that would deter other migrants. Turns out it wasn't as big a deterrent as you might have thought, but at the same time it was cruelty. And you create loyalty amongst your base when you already say, yep, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose any votes. Look, I could have my officials pull a breastfeeding baby away from its mum, send the mum to one detention center and the baby to another, and I wouldn't lose any votes. The thing that's often unspoken about that is it cements the loyalty of your base, because they'll already agree, yep, whatever you do is fine, or they'll rationalize it as necessary, and then they're bound to you in a form of trauma bonding, because like people who've been accessories to the same crime, like, oh yeah, we both know what we did last summer. We buried that. We did that horrible, cruel thing, or we supported it. So yeah, we're going to keep supporting you because we are you and you are us now. We're bonded over the departure from normal human considerations that we both chose to celebrate. Yes. And China also has been, whistleblowers have pointed out that they harvest human organs from the prisoners, which are predominantly Uyghur Muslim Chinese residents, Chinese citizens, but they have that ethnicity and that religion that's different from the one endorsed by the Chinese Communist Party. They don't like Muslims. It's a stigmatized minority. But you can make an appointment at Chinese hospitals to get an organ. So you need new kidneys. You can make a date of June the 4th. And no other country in the developed world can you make an appointment with a hospital. But in China, they can do that for you because they can kill a detainee on a particular date and take their retinas or their kidneys or whatever organ part is being donated. And so you can have your life organized around that. But it's really quite a horrific crime. And when whistleblowers report on it, it doesn't usually get talked about broadly in world media because it is so horrific. And difficult to substantiate, but I've seen video of doctors agreeing to make appointments for organ donation, as well as lots of reports of whistleblowers testifying to incredibly inhumane treatment of detainees, beatings of women using electric cattle prods to electrocute them, rape, often a tool used to humiliate women, and increase genocide in a way by ethnically diluting a stigmatized minority group by forcing women to bear the babies of their rapists. Yeah, it's pretty awful. Well, that's definitely a troll thing to say. America has a two-party system, and a two-party system is useful in that when one party has become lost to corruption, you evict them from office. So that type of third-party talk is what produced Trump in the first place, but you probably know that. You probably know that. There's been some reports lately on rampant COVID cases. There was 8 cases in one detention facility just amongst the staff, and I think it was about 58 reported cases of COVID just in the population, and that they were complaining of medical neglect and that they didn't have masks, they weren't issued with masks, and their captors weren't issued masks either. And it's a very common form of genocide to kill a lot of people through medical neglect. Yeah, the Electoral College is to ensure each state has a say in the presidential election, regardless of population, which was put in the Constitution to favour low population states. And when I say low population states, some of those states had a high population, but their high population was comprised of slaves, and with a smaller number of white slave owners who were very wealthy, who owned a great deal of agricultural land and derived a great deal of profit from running an industry that with no labor, with very small labor costs because of the high profit margins associated with enslaved labor. Now, having a great deal of wealth then as now imbues people with political power. And so to bring those wealthy, powerful people to the table, the founding fathers, many of whom were slave owners themselves, concocted this compromise deal, which was that slave-owning states, southern slave-owning states, were allowed to count 3 out of every 5 slave bodies towards their population tallies. And of course, every state was also allowed to have a senator, regardless of size, which disproportionately gives the people of Wyoming huge political power and dilutes the political power extraordinarily of people from California. So right-wing people often won't know this, but California is the 5th largest economy in the world, which is why it's such a big plank of right-wing lies to deceive their supporters that California is always crumbling, that there's so many homeless people. There are homeless people, but it's not a product of lack of state revenue or lack of state success. California is the 5th largest economy in the world, and it's a state. So it's competing with other countries from all over the world, and it's the 5th largest economy. Just California. So California is the biggest contributor to federal coffers. The taxes that California pays to the federal government are huge. But right-wingers always disparage blue states. And in a way, this is a function of this blue state, red state competition that's arisen with a lot of resentment that's never verbalized or addressed, that arises as a function of the disproportionate weight given to rural voters in low population states that have a senator for a much smaller amount of their population relative to people in California who have the same number of senators but a vastly greater population. So all of this guff about, but it's needed so that some states aren't overlooked. what it's doing is de-emphasizing the value of individual voters and their votes and pitting states against each other, blue states against red states, with the advantage being given to red states, even though they're typically economically far less viable than blue states, because red states have been stuck in a defeatist ideology of we lost the war and we have a chip on our shoulder and we used to derive all of this wealth from slavery and they took that from us. They'll pay, we'll relitigate the Civil War somehow. And we know we have disproportionate political power per vote relative to those people in states with lots of cities, those city folk. They wouldn't know what to do with all of this power. It's better that we have it because we are more religious and we have, we're just better. It feeds the unmerited superiority complex of conservative rural voters, and it does so at the expense of political power of people who happen to exist in more populous, more economically successful, on average, blue states. So I hope that addresses your point of view, Two Spoons. Now I understand the Electoral College very well. Did we talk to that person? Because Oswald Mosley is a very famous British fascist. Did we talk to the fascists? I think out of principle, we don't. We acknowledge that you probably want human connection. And as I was saying, yes, the Electoral College pits states against each other, blue states, red states. There's Republican and Democratic voters in each state. So first of all, it forces you to overgeneralize about states. There are blue voters in red states, but they get dismissed and overlooked because there's just this pitting of state against state in this weighted and unjust competition brought about by the Electoral College system, which was a compromise instituted to bring wealthy slave owners to the table during the period of the founding of America. So all of this, the blue states would dominate the red states only insofar as blue voters in those states, if they were persuaded that a leader was appropriate for America, yes, it enforces this idea that blue state voters only vote for their own advancement. Good citizens vote for their country's advancement, but trying to rationalize the Electoral College as a good thing has taught people to assume that voters only vote for their state. And that's why there needs to be a thumb on the scale for red states. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair. No, your whole system is rigged in favor of red states, even though there's less of you, even though on average there's less economic success. That instead of gravitating towards migration as the new engine for American prosperity and success, you're just too many people are stuck in the nostalgia for slavery and stuck in the ripple effect of eons of rationalization that slavery wasn't that bad because there's a hierarchy that has validity to it, where white people occupy the top rung and black people occupy a lower rung. So you shouldn't need to fear New York and California. Indeed, the population of New York and California have suffered greatly from the impositions of the delusional red state voters who have believed a conman and a charlatan. And I shouldn't say red state voters. It's detracting from my own argument that there's no such thing as state voters. There's just a critical mass of Republican voters in some states. But there's also blue Democratic voters as well who get erased by making everything this battle between red or blue states. So yes, because of the thumb on the scale for low population, typically red states that used to be wealthy because of slavery and that clearly have too much of a residual yearning, hence the proliferation of Confederate flags and racism, residual racism, unconscious. And I read a great article written by someone who works within the white evangelical church. He points out that behavioral scientists have found out that if you belong to a white evangelical church, you're 30 points more likely to agree with racist statements, such as poor outcomes for black families are just a function of poor personal characteristics. Yes, you don't have to be an American scholar or an American citizen to understand the Electoral College. And it does have very broad support. There is very broad support for doing away with the Electoral College. But the pro-Electoral College racist people, whether they consciously understand that it's racist to give red states with a history of slave owning and a history of slavery rationalizing ideas and slavery rationalizing hierarchies, that it's unfair to give those states an unmerited thumb that gives them an outsized degree of influence on selecting the president. And look at what's happened as a function of selecting such a president. He knew he could count on the goodwill of people whose worldview he was validating. So the reason why Donald Trump could look to the camera and say, they love me so much, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose a vote, is because he knows how powerful it is to look at someone and say, you're right, everything you've suspected all along, but elites tried to tell you was racist. You're actually right. The problem with America is deviating from this hierarchy where white people should occupy this bit and Mexican people shouldn't be considered in the same breath. They're rapists. Remember when he said Mexicans are rapists? Some, I assume, are good people. That is Donald Trump's hierarchy. He knew that his personal beliefs resonate with the racist beliefs of a lot of white America. Kind of a majority of white America, but that's been the case for a long time. A Democratic president hasn't won the majority of white voter support since 1964. And that's been because Democratic presidents and the Democratic Party has had a platform of supporting civil rights and supporting Black Americans to at least a greater degree than was espoused by the Republican Party, that have run for decades on a thinly veiled racist platform of disparaging social safety nets to people who clearly had a firm conviction that the only Americans who were benefiting from these social safety nets were Mexicans and welfare queens, meaning Black Americans, whom they disparaged. So the symbiotic dance between the pre-existing racism of some white Americans who had grown up thinking it's bad to be taught to condemn slavery, there wasn't anything that wrong with it. That's why after Lincoln was assassinated, you had Andrew Jackson, who basically undermined the benefits of Reconstruction, who undermined and rewound the advances organized for the Black community. So that then you had more turmoil and trauma and eventually the civil rights movement. Black people could vote during Reconstruction, but this was wound back. So the civil rights movement didn't win Black people the right to vote for the first time. They'd already had it before when many had been lynched and killed, yes, by white people who found it difficult to accept political power in the hands of Black Americans whom they had until recently despised as slaves and less than human. And that was how they rationalized generating wealth at the expense of their human dignity and freedom. That's how they justified stealing the freedom of enslaved people. Yes, people claim that it's to give an equal voice to smaller states. But if it's one person, one vote, then everybody actually has an equal voice. And you're not fabricating this conflict between states. You're not pitting states against states. You're not giving voters from Wyoming an unfair advantage over voters from California and saying, well, otherwise Wyoming would be too small to be heard. Wyoming is not a monolith. Wyoming is comprised of voters. If you treat it as a state that has to have disproportionate influence, then if it has a majority of red voters, it becomes a red state and joins in this battle between red states and blue states. Instead, there are people, some of whom vote Republican, some of whom vote Democratic, and then once you've gotten rid of this incredibly deadly Electoral College system, and the pandemic has made it deadly because it has facilitated the racism of Donald Trump. It's facilitated his use of it as a campaign selling point. Look, I'm here to validate your racist beliefs, and I'm here to enact out some racist harm for you to celebrate. So Donald Trump knows that Black Americans are disproportionately harmed by COVID, and that contributes significantly to, and this is my analysis, it contributes significantly to the absolute refusal of Trump supporters in many instances to wear masks, to take precautions, to approach lockdowns as if it's necessary, to take the virus significantly. They know that white people aren't proportionately as affected as Black and brown Americans, which is terrible because they're still dying massively. Grandparents are dying. Yes, it's disproportionately older people, but also vulnerable Americans are dying. Yes, more Black Americans are vulnerable. They're more likely to have comorbidities. It's a function of living around racist people that you're more likely to have heart conditions. But the same is true of being really racist. If you're very racist, you're likely to have low trust and you're more likely to have heart conditions as well. Why am I arguing with a Nazi whose understanding of the American system is inferior to mine? Yes, the illegitimate Russian beholden president seeded the coronavirus in California. So let's make this a bit bigger so we can look at that. So this is from February. The whistleblower wrote that the US health workers treated coronavirus quarantine patients without proper training. Well, they weren't really health workers. They were just administrative workers from DHHS. So the whistleblower's report was given to the Washington Post. Employees with the Department of Health and Human Services were tasked to receive Americans evacuated from Wuhan. You'll remember Wuhan, ground zero in China, without proper training or protective gear. Afterwards, the workers who did not show symptoms of infection were allowed to go home without being tested for the virus. At least one of the HHS staffers left California on a commercial flight. The official who filed their complaint to the Office of Special Counsel and claims that they were improperly reassigned after expressing their concern describes two instances in which HHS staff were improperly deployed at military bases in California where returning Americans were quarantined. While Center for Disease Control, CDC personnel were in full gown, gloves, and hazmat attire, the HHS workers were not trained in wearing such personal protective equipment for their face-to-face interactions with the quarantined patients. The complaint also states that senior HHS officials dismissed the staffers' healthcare concerns, claiming that they were hurting staff morale, that they were accused of not being team players, and they had their mental and emotional stability questioned. Now listen very carefully. The report states that around 14 workers for the Administration of Children and Families were sent to the March Air Force Base in Riverside County, and another 13 Administration for Children and Family workers were sent to Travis Air Force Base in Solano County, where the first patient to be infected with coronavirus from an unknown origin tested positive this week. And when I say this week, this article is published on February the 27th. So at this point, it was not widely known that the virus was airborne. It was not widely known. It was not broadly accepted. We know now that Trump was telling Bob Woodward on tape, in taped conversations on February the 7th, that he understood the virus was very contagious and was airborne. So whatever Trump understands, people in the higher echelons of the Trump administration also know that this virus is airborne. And they sent 13 DHHS workers from the Administration for Children and Families to the Travis Air Force Base in Solano, in California, without training or adequate protective gear. Didn't test them for COVID afterwards. Some of them flew home on commercial flights. And then the first case of unknown origin was in Solano County. So that is evidence which supports a hypothesis that the Trump administration purposefully seeded the virus in California because it's a blue state. When you combine that with evidence from Vanity Fair, in which whistleblowers reported, share that article with you as well. Whistleblowers reported that Jared Kushner started a national testing team to help Americans get tested and then abandoned it because of a rationale that it was going to be more politically convenient to not have a national testing plan, to just let states compete for tests and testing ingredients like swabs and protective equipment, because then the death toll would be blamed on the blue state governors. So let's have a look at that. So if you're curious about that article about the whistleblower, I recommend you have a look and that you bring it to the attention of other journalists. This is how Jared's testing plan went poof into thin air. So the president's son-in-law, so they produced a plan for an aggressive, coordinated national COVID response that could have brought the pandemic under control. So why did the White House spike it in favor of a shambolic 50-state response? Why did the administration spike it and refuse to use the resources of the federal government? Let's have a look. Actually, I might make this smaller while I scroll down so I don't hurt anybody's eyes while I'm scrolling. So they paid a lot of money. First of all, 3.5 million tests. They paid $52 million for that. Turned out to be not usable. But the plan was, rather than have states fight each other for scarce diagnostic tests and limited lab capacity, the plan would have set up a system of national oversight and coordination to surge supplies, allocate test kits, lift regulatory and contractual roadblocks, and establish a widespread virus surveillance system by the fall to help pinpoint subsequent outbreaks. People probably always assume that that's what the administration is doing, but let it be known that that's what the administration planned to do, but decided against. No national coordinating testing strategy was ever announced. The plan, according to the participants, just went poof into thin air. By April, some who worked on the plan were given the strong impression that it would soon be shared with President Trump and announced by the White House. The plan, though imperfect, was a starting point. Simply working together as a nation on it would have put us in a fundamentally different place, said the participant. But the effort ran headlong into shifting sentiment at the White House. Trusting his vaunted political instincts, President Trump had been downplaying concerns about the virus and spreading misinformation about it, efforts that were soon amplified by Republican elected officials and right-wing media figures. The deadliness of Fox and the deadliness of unprincipled Republican senators and congresspeople. So worried about the stock market and his re-election prospects, Trump also feared that more testing would only lead to higher case counts and more bad publicity. Meanwhile, Dr. Deborah Birx, the White House's coronavirus response coordinator, was reportedly sharing models with senior staff that optimistically, and erroneously it turned out, predicted the virus would soon fade away. Most troubling of all, perhaps, was a sentiment. Let me just highlight this from you. I'm not making it up. This is from the article. This is a whistleblower about Jared's non-eventuated testing plan. A sentiment the expert said, so it's an expert whistleblower as well. An expert said a member of Kushner's team expressed that because the virus had hit blue states hardest, a national plan was unnecessary and would not make sense politically. The political folks believed that because it was going to be relegated to Democratic states, that they could blame those governors, and that would be an effective political strategy, said the expert. That logic may have swayed Jared Kushner. It was very clear that Jared was ultimately the decision maker as to what plan was going to come out. So that's, whereas of course now they didn't contain the virus, they didn't have a plan, and red states are getting hit very hard because presumably they have the lowest compliance with the recommendations for minimizing viral transmission. I just had some honey to soothe my throat. Hello, Alan. All right, so that's a hypothesis that has merit based just on what we know about the unprincipled nature with which Trump has approached the pandemic, that he lied to the American people, and he lied and deceived American governors, whilst he was admitting his true knowledge of coronavirus to Bob Woodward on tape, that it was highly contagious, that it could kill younger people as well as more elderly people, that it was airborne, that it was spread just by breathing the air. He knew all of these things, and his administration willfully sent 13 and 14 health officials to 2 different air bases in California to repatriate Americans against the advice of experts from Wuhan, China. They could have been put in lodging and stayed there. They could have just dealt with people in full hazmat suit, but instead they got to meet face-to-face with DHHS employees who were not adequately briefed, who were not adequately prepared, who were not adequately fitted out with protective gear. And this is a disease that younger people can have very mildly, can carry asymptomatically, and can spread, particularly on an airplane. Husband's cough is gone, which is good. And yes, there's still no plan. And America is still floundering because the president is willfully failing to protect Americans. And he's counting on the acquiescence of racist Americans who don't care about the virus because they believe it's disproportionately affecting Black Americans, and they don't care about Black Americans. And they're also overly susceptible to deceit spread via Facebook and spread by the president himself. My microphone keeps falling over. I need to buy a new one, probably. Stay put, you. I got some more sleep today. My husband took the kids out to a mall. We're allowed to go to malls. They wore masks, but they got to eat gelato and they had an awesome time. And I got to sleep. So bless my husband. He helped me get over my cold. He's a good man. The news has been very captivating lately. I'm sort of on the edge of noticing that, yes, Trump is struggling in a lot of the polls, but also this flip to Trump is being very open now that he expects the election to be, the outcome to be pronounced by the court system, and that he intends to push through with a Supreme Court justice who's going to be beholden to him, who might be aggravated by attacks from the left to then be like, yes, as Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, I support Trump because he supported me. And even when you confront her, as an Australian journalist did, with all of the bad things he's done, she just says, no, I'm supported because the left attacked me and my makeup and called me a liar, but President Trump had my back, so I've got his back. It's like, that's not the relationship you're supposed to have with the truth or the president. If people attack you for lying because you pass on the lies of the president, your defense can't be, well, the only person not calling me a liar was the president, so I'm not going to reply or respond to any information about his lies and what they've cost the American people. Now, people have noticed, it's been reported on in previously published articles, that with fascists, it's not calling them out for their corruption that has always won the day. In fact, people living under a strongman fascist have a big ability to overlook scandal and corruption that would bring down people in a normal situation, because fascism short circuits supporters' ability to engage with normal information about scandal. They can't deal with information, they can only deal with very powerful lived experience. So some people turned away from Hitler after Germany got the S-bombed out of it in World War II, and then they realized, you know what, maybe Hitler and this whole Germany first thing isn't working out so great for us. When American soldiers were liberating the camps, they forced German citizens of nearby suburbs to march through the camps and to observe the horrors. They marched them past pits of emaciated bodies, and they vomited, they held up their handkerchiefs to their noses, they cried. They said, we didn't know this was happening. The American forces were like, you have to see, you lived a suburb away from this. How can you claim to have not known? They confronted them. But we know now that there are reports being released now that show there's this high prevalence of COVID-19 and medical neglect in the detention facilities. There's been a whistleblower reporting on some non-consensual hysterectomies. I don't know that there've been that many confirmed cases of non-consensual hysterectomies, but even any cases is not okay. Yes, Sarah Huckabee Sanders calls herself a Christian. I might bring up that article. Okay. So this was an article published on July the 27th of this year, in which an evangelical Christian man shares research findings that say, racism is amongst white Christians is higher than amongst the non-religious, and that it's not a coincidence. The light-skinned Jesus conjured up by white congregations has demanded the preservation of inequality as part of the divine order. So this commitment to divine order and this internalization that white people are at the pinnacle of the divine order means white evangelical Christians might be very committed to believing that they're not racist. But surveys conducted have found that white Christians, including evangelical Protestants, mainline Protestants, and Catholics, are nearly twice as likely as religiously unaffiliated white people to say that the killings of black men by police are isolated incidents rather than part of a pattern of how police treat African Americans. And white Christians are about 30% points more likely to say monuments to Confederate soldiers are symbols of Southern pride rather than symbols of racism. White Christians are also about 20 percentage points more likely to disagree with this statement. Generations of slavery and discrimination have created conditions that make it difficult for blacks to work their way out of the lower class. And these trends generally persist even in the wake of the recent protests for racial justice. So the author of this piece is a white Christian who was raised Southern Baptist and shaped by a denominational college and seminary. So it pains him to see these patterns in the data. So he created a racism index consisting of 15 questions, but his index reveals a clear distinction. Compared to non-religious whites, white Christians register higher median scores on the racism index, and the differences amongst white Christian subgroups are largely differences of degree rather than kind. So white evangelical Protestants have the highest median score on the racism index, but it is a mistake to see this as merely a Southern or an evangelical problem. The median scores of white Catholics is 0.72, so it's 0.78 for evangelical Protestants, and for white mainline Protestants, 0.69, which are groups that are more culturally dominant in the Northeast and Midwest. So each median score for each white Christian subgroup is significantly above the median scores of the general population, which is 0.57. White religiously unaffiliated Americans, 0.42, and black Protestants, 0.24. The disparity reveals that the common denominator is religious identity. So he wrote a book called White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. White Christians that he discusses these results with tend to explain it away. They say it's not Christianity, it's other variables. Or they argue that even if white Christian identity is implicated, the results are muddied by the inclusion of people who have no real connection to actual churches, folks who are Christian in name only. The no true Scotsman argument. So the results point to a stark conclusion. Whilst most white Christians think of themselves as people who hold warm feelings towards African Americans, holding racist views is nonetheless positively and independently associated with white Christian identity. Again, this troubling relationship holds not just for white evangelical Protestants, but also for white mainline Protestants and white Catholics. Moreover, these statistical models refute the assertion that attending church makes white Christians less racist. Among white evangelicals, in fact, the opposite is true. The relationship between holding racist views and white Christian identity is actually stronger amongst more frequent church attendees than among less frequent church attendees. I suspect many of my fellow white Christians will be appalled by these findings, asking with genuine dismay, how can this be? Haven't white Christians created charities of all kinds, built the infrastructure of much of our civil society, and provided leadership on a host of social reforms, including the abolitionist movement, which was led in part by Christians moved by their faith? Well, turns out maybe that was Christians who were an exception, more of an exception. Sad. But when we allow ourselves to cast our gaze beyond the rosy stories we tell about ourselves as champions and representatives of all that is good in America. A terrifyingly troubled alternative history emerges. The unsettling truth is that for nearly all of American history, the light-skinned Jesus, conjured up by most white congregations, was not merely indifferent to the status quo of racial inequality. He demanded its defense and preservation as part of the natural, divinely ordained order of things. And the cultural context he cites is that it was common practice, observed, for example, at the Baptist church that was a progenitor of my parents' church in Georgia, for slave-holding whites to take enslaved people to church with them. The practice had it that whites sat in the front, while enslaved blacks sat in the back or specially constructed galleries above. As late as the 1940s, urban Catholic parishes in major cities such as New York still required black members to sit in the back pews and approach the altar last to receive the bread and wine of the Eucharist. Moreover, the content of what was preached confirmed that white supremacy was part of the Christian worldview. Sermons by necessity tended to be light on the themes of freedom and liberation, in Exodus, for example, and heavy on the mandates of obedient and being content in one's social station from the New Testament writings of Paul. That's sad. In these seed beds of American Christianity, an a priori commitment to white supremacy shaped what could be practiced. A slave master could not share a common cup of Christian fellowship with his slaves, and preached white dominance and black subservience. Those were expressions of God's ideal for the organization of human societies. So there's a lot of people still attached or haven't really emerged from those ideas. White dominance and black subservience. The plain testimony of history is that alongside what good we white Christians have done, white Christian theology and institutions have also declared the blessings of God on the enslavement of millions of black Americans, the construction of a brutal system of racial segregation enforced by law and lynchings, resistance to the civil rights movement, and the mass incarceration of millions of African Americans. As monuments to white supremacy are falling all across America, a great cloud of witnesses is gathering. Our fellow Black American citizens, and indeed the entire country, are waiting to see whether we white Christians can finally find the humility and courage and love to face the truth about our long relationship with white supremacy and to dismantle the Christian worldview we built to justify it. Well, I guess he's saying dismantle the racist white Christian worldview. He's saying that there's some Christian worldview, presumably, that could remain, but that was his final sentence, that they're waiting to see if you have enough humility, if white Christians have enough humility and love and courage to face that truth. Yes, Catholics as well. The possible new SCOTUS pick is a sect of Catholicism called, sort of subset, not really Catholic, People of Praise. They have handmaids, which have been renamed female leaders. Kavanagh's definitely Catholic, and Barr is Catholic as well. And yep, Amy Barrett is very right-wing and has already made lots of legal decisions against reproductive rights. Thank you, Alan. I'm glad you were listening for that. It felt a little self-indulgent to read so much of the one article, but I really thought that was important to share. Because that is the battle for the soul of this time. But again, we're not going to get that article out to people. But it's highlighting that there are people working within the white Christian community who are prepared to acknowledge that it's had a role and continues to have a role. I have a YouTube commentator, Pompeius Magnus, saying that there's a contradictory finding that more frequent church attendance correlates with less support for Trump. I would find it difficult to believe that. I bet if you break it down according to denomination, then it wouldn't hold true for different denominations. Maybe it holds more true for Catholicism, that if you're a more devout Catholic, you might struggle with someone who's pro-death as Trump. But actually, yeah, no, I can't imagine that holding true. So feel free to send me a link to those stats if you find it. But at the moment, I'm finding more plausible the reporting from that white Christian researcher. Let's find out what his name was. Robert P. Jones. He's the founder and CEO of PRRI and the author of White Too Long, The Legacy of White Supremacy in American Christianity. What's PRRY? I'll have to Google it to find it out. I will internet search. Robert Jones, PRRI. Oh, he's got a nice face. Public. I'm just coming across this acronym. He used to be an assistant professor of religious studies at Missouri State University. He holds a PhD in religion from Emory University and a Bachelor of Science in Computing Science and Mathematics. That's awesome. What a great guy. He's frequently featured in major national media. I'm so excited by that. Still doesn't say what PRI is, so we'll go back. Public Religion Research Institute. Public Religion Research Institute. So Robert P. Jones, you may see him on national media. Very exciting. Because that's work that we need to do, and work can sometimes start with one person. All right. Catholicism's trending. I'm presuming that's because of Amy Coney Barrett, which is sad. Look, the Republicans will pretend that Catholicism is under assault so that they can say religion's under assault, and if you're religious, you have to get out to vote for Trump. But Trump has seen some erosion from evangelicals and Catholics lately, and apparently it's because, not that they're overlooking his sins, they're saying he's lacking in virtues. He's not kind. He's not scoring well on a score of kindness. Look at this Marco Rubio lying to people that no religion will be safe from the same attacks. She's not Catholic, and it doesn't matter. Do you know what? Let's grab this conversation back. Let's not even talk about Amy Barrett. It's an impeached. We're going to talk about an impeached president and say, hey, an impeached president does not get to select Supreme Court justices, or should not get to select a Supreme Court justice 38 days before an election while voting, in fact, has already started. He is an impeached president, and he is already saying that he will not respect the outcome of the election if people vote for his rival, that he will only respect the outcome of the election if he wins or if the Supreme Court rules in his favor, and therefore he needs an extra justice. Now, he's admitted this. Let's make sure we don't get all hysterical about what Amy Barrett is like, because if she gets in, she gets in, and we can't stop it. Trying to tell people about our objections to her is not going to make Democrats suddenly have access to strategies that they couldn't access before, no matter how much we say, hey, women don't want to lose reproductive choice, or people don't want to lose. We don't want 20 million people to lose access to health care. If Amy Barrett votes with the other conservative justices to do Trump's bidding in his court case and overturn dismantle the whole Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare. Can't succumb to fear about what she might do. We have to still keep framing this as the injustice and the unacceptability and the anti-democratic nature of allowing an impeached. The House is half of the legislative branch, and they impeached that MF. He's an impeached president. He should not be able to appoint a Supreme Court justice that he is claiming will get to decide the outcome of the election if he doesn't outright win a majority of votes in the Electoral College system. No, PRRI means Public Religion Research Institute. Maybe it's an old comment. I'm sure the article about Bill Barr Unbound, is it talking about how terrible he is? Because I know it's hard to even bear how terrible Bill Barr is. He's awful. We've known that since he misrepresented the Mueller report and blacked out lots of it and lied to people about what the content was so that people falsely assumed that Robert Mueller had exonerated Trump, which he didn't. He was too bloody Republican anyway to properly call Trump to account or call even his children to account. Bob was raised Roman Catholic and close to the seminary at 13. You got smart and completely left the church. Yes, but we're going to be disciplined about not addressing, well, I'm going to be disciplined about not addressing her Catholicism or her people of praise religion. Not talking about it. Robert Cardillo, who served under 6 presidents and briefed Trump. I can be silent no longer. 4 more years would be devastating. We must elect a thoughtful, moral, responsible, respectful leader on November the 3rd. Our current president is not that leader. Yep, we have to keep talking about the outcomes now for the American people. Tom Nichols says, Dems are fired up to fight the wrong battle. You're not going to stop this nomination, Democrats. You don't have the votes. It's kind of true. The key is to make the GOP pay for it in November. If you can manage to do that without blowing yourselves up first over her religion or her kids. Yes, definitely don't mention her kids. Try and not talk about the religion because our objections to her religious devotion aren't going to stop her from getting her position. We don't have the votes. So raising those objections now is not going to increase the commitment of the Democrats to blocking her nomination. First of all, they can't. If they could bring up some impeachments to delay the nomination, then they'll either have those strategies or they won't. Our complaining about Amy Barrett's not going to affect those calculations as to whether or not they can politically get away with impeaching Bill Barr. He's got a lot to be impeached for. And if they start an impeachment in the House and then send it to the Senate, apparently it's constitutionally mandated that you have to proceed with the impeachment order of the day business, conduct the impeachment trial in the Senate before you vote to confirm any justices. But who's to say Mitch McConnell would abide by that in any case? Now, this is just a historical point before I go, that 37 years ago, thanks to a funny feeling in his gut, a 44-year-old Russian lieutenant colonel calculated that a satellite warning of the launch of 5 US intercontinental ballistic missiles, like nuclear weapons, was a false alarm. And that conviction that maybe it's just not real, averted a catastrophic nuclear war. So because he was able to go, maybe this is a technical glitch, and he could have very easily gone, right, he was supposed to see the 5 missiles and go, okay, launch the nuclear weapons from my nuclear submarine. He didn't. Everybody would be dead if he had just gone with that. Look, we'd all be dead from nuclear winter. US would have retaliated against Russia. Bad things. Of course, Trump is not just running for re-election. Trump is running to stay out of prison. We know this, yes, which makes him very desperate. But desperation kind of has a stench to it that doesn't always win over voters. So that's why It's good to avoid getting stuck in identity politics if we can, but appeal to the things we have in common, which is a lot of Republican voters actually support wearing masks and support science. Yes, it's annoying and remarkable that such a strong number of them still support Trump and his undermining of public health messages. But it's important to notice that not all of them do. And if the ones that do support wearing masks and science can be are therefore motivated to either not vote for Trump or even better to turn out and vote for Biden, then Trump has lost the Electoral College and consequently the election. Someone asks that Trump's Twitter account be shut down after the election so he can't use the platform to incite violence. That would be nice. I've made the point sometimes that he often seems to be inviting an army. If we've seen that footage of Donald Trump Jr., and I might look for that now. Donald Trump Jr., because he gives this very unhinged speech. What? Yeah, does Barr go if Trump goes? Yeah, he goes to prison. He's done a lot of bad things, very illegal things, very corrupt things. I'm just going to share something with you. My camera went off. Sorry about that. It's a good incentive for me to go, but before I go, I'll play this.
In America, I'm Donald Trump Jr.
No, that's not. Have no sound. Can you guys hear anything?
Thomas Jefferson famously said, "It's madness." Good evening, America. I'm Donald Trump Jr. Thomas Jefferson famously said,
Okay, that's just some silliness. I thought it was a real thing. I must have clicked on the wrong thing. I'm going to make the screen black again for a second. Technical problems. This is what I want. Okay.
Papadopoulos convicted of lying to the FBI.
Don't remember much about it.
Rick Gates pleaded guilty.
Paul Manafort convicted on 8 criminal counts.
Felix Sater. If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like.
Michael Cohen.
Michael Flynn.
Roger Stone, guilty on 7 counts.
Steve Bannon arrested in connection with a crowdfunding scheme called We Build the Wall.
Midas Touch is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Papadopoulos convicted of lying to the FBI.
Don't remember much about it.
Rick Gates.
So that's, just something I like to remind people about, to point out that Trump's beholden to Russia and that all of that obstruction, all of that crime was to conceal from the American people the nature of Trump not being actually like a normal president, acting in the interests of the American people. He is subject to influence from a foreign power because he owes them. He owes them. Now, this is Donald Trump Jr. trying to get together an army. So he uses the word army, and he makes some interesting assertions, but he also looks like he's very much on drugs or very drunk, which is interesting considering that the Trump campaign chose to put this video out there. Maybe they just thought his drugged appearance added to his emotional impact.
The radical left are laying the groundwork to steal this election from my father, President Donald Trump. They are planting stories that President Trump will have a landslide lead on election night, but will lose when they finish counting the mail-in ballots. Their plan is to add millions of fraudulent ballots that can cancel your vote and overturn the election. We cannot let that happen. We need every able-bodied man, woman to join Army for Trump's election security operation at defendyourballot.com. We need you to help us watch them, not just on election day, but also during early voting and at the counting boards. President Trump is going to win. Don't let them steal it. Go to defendyourballot.com and enlist today.
So enlist an army. It sounds very much like stochastic terrorism. Oops. All right, guys. So thank you for watching those videos for me, and I am still sorry. What drugs did you think Donald Trump Jr. was on in that video? And wasn't it extraordinary? Xanax? No, what's the report from the University of West Virginia? Yes, Trump's Twitter would have been revoked a long time ago if he wasn't POTUS, but it's also the monetary engine of Twitter. So yes, I'm sad I can't wave goodbye to my audience and that this is something that keeps periodically happening. I guess my computer needs a health check or something. But it was lovely to talk with you all today. And thank you, Alan. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Michelle. And do you have any action steps you'd like to share with us today? Any good work that you've been doing, helping, maybe if you've been able to register any new voters, or if you've signed up to be a poll watcher? Not that I'm Donald Trump Jr. advocating for you to enlist in an army of poll watchers to stop people from stealing ballots, although it would be nice actually to have some poll watchers to observe that particularly that the UPS, the United States Postal Service, isn't throwing away mailed-in ballots. Alan can't join that army because he's got bone spurs. Fair play to you, sir. Fair play. Are you feeling good about all the polls, you guys, that are showing that Biden's just got this very indomitable lead across most swing states? In fact, is it all swing states? Probably, because now states that are usually very solidly red are now swing states. Iowa's a swing state now. Georgia's a swing state. Texas is a swing state, which is great news. And we'd be able to relax were it not that there's also this complication of a president signaling his intention of challenging the election results when he loses and taking it to the Supreme Court to pronounce on, and also simultaneously stacking the Supreme Court with an appointment whilst its previous justice is not even interred in the ground. So yes, this person's feeling great. Michelle's feeling hopeful. That's good, because of course a lot of what Trump does is to disempower and intimidate as well, and to sell a plausible narrative to his followers so that they get angry that the election's been stolen from them and they act out with violence, presumably in the hope that people will then be more motivated to compromise and allow him to stay out of prison and make some deal with Trump and his family to reduce the legal consequences for them in exchange for getting Trump to call off his violent supporters. Keeping up the pressure. Bob's family dropped 5 Biden ballots today, straight blue down the ballot. That's good. I'm hearing about focus groups with undecided women voters that they were upset by Trump's talk of not conceding if he lost. And yes, it's a lesson to all of us that residual racism and that there's a high level of prevalence of Western chauvinism, otherwise known as white supremacy, that motivated people to believe the best of a white conman whilst believing the worst of a black president, and that engendered a lot of backlash that was then used by Russians coordinating with Republican traitors and a Republican Trump campaign manager, Paul Manafort, and others. And that we even know now that there was a Republican Trump supporting FBI agent called William Barnett. You should Google it and Google Empty Wheel, who's an analyst, because William Barr's been releasing documents to try and show that this one FBI agent was suspicious of the Flynn investigation. But he was suspicious because it was very pro-Trump. And in fact, William Barnett had an outside influence on Robert Mueller, not being clear enough in his report conclusions that Flynn coordinated with Trump before illegally calling the Russian ambassador to urge the Russian ambassador not to reciprocate, or to tell Putin not to reciprocate with sanctions on America in response to the sanctions that Obama instituted to punish Russia for the attacks that he knew Russia was conducting on America's electoral integrity. Bob's been picking up political signs, and all are being given out by older suburban white ladies. I've heard that the older suburban white ladies are not impressed with Trump and his lack of kindness, and perhaps they've been really feeling the lack of access to their grandchildren, and they've been seeing in sharp contrast perhaps the deadliness of Trump's lies and under response to the corona pandemic. Alan's put up my Patreon account, which is very kind of Alan. Thank you. Much obliged. Thank you to Alan and to all of my kind and generous Patreons who reward and reinforce me for the small amount of labor I put in, or moderate-sized amount of labor I put into this broadcast as often as I can. But also, if you enjoy it, please recommend it to your friends as well, or acquaintances, even, because that will. What good will it do, actually, guys? What good does it do? Sometimes I ask myself. It provides a focal point for people to come and talk about the news of the day and to keep their sanity and help mitigate against the effect of propaganda, which can rise to saturation levels. But what service do I provide that in any way distinguishes itself from mainstream media services? I guess it's more personally interactive. To learn. Thanks, Bob. Hi, Joy. Thanks for dropping in and telling us that racism isn't real and that you've never personally experienced it, and only things that you've personally experienced should be counted as valid. I do often say that the tendency to agree with a statement that white people are discriminated against more than black people in America is a very potent predictor of Trump support. But we all have our own journeys, and some people take a while to come to grips, to have the moral courage to come to grips with the disproportionate rate at which Black Americans are killed by police officers, who take a while to have the moral courage to come to grips with the long-standing effects of redlining, the purposeful withholding of government-backed mortgages, and indeed any mortgages, from Black Americans over time, so that they could not have the same opportunities as white families to buy property, to benefit from the appreciation of value of property, which is the main pathway to building intergenerational wealth and wealth cushioning effects amongst families, which is why white families have so much more wealth relative to median Black families. And that's statistically true, and it's not disproven by any wealthy Black families. Just once you've averaged everything out, there's so much more wealth with reasons that's in the hands of white families. That's in no small measures a function of institutionally racist policies and practices. All right, folks, you're stuck with the black screen for so long. Take care. All the best, everybody. And I hope to fix my computer and see you in person again. Oh, look at me. I've had this Trump-Pence thing up for so long. Let's move it away from there. No. We need to see something prettier. I know. Why don't we put in...
I will faithfully. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. So help me God.
Let the television burn, babe. There's a riot in the street.
If you have been waiting to break glass in case of emergency, we are there.
Lying at their feet. We felt a change, but ain't it a shame how it all turned out?
You know what I am? I'm a nationalist.
It was a long time coming. It's a little late night.
I will teach my grandkids to
They're
hang
gonna
one.
stack up the dead till they block out the sun. These white boys with money make the whole world run.
Can anyone on the Republican side say unequivocally Black Lives Matter?
You and me, brother, we're the dangerous ones. You and me, brother, we're the
There's nothing wrong with it. I got a daughter right here. She's 18 years old. 18. She's the first time voting. Ain't no burn.
So let it burn, let it burn, let the motherfucker burn. It's election day.
We have to fight until the end, though, brother. We got to go down swinging.
We are the first generation to be able to say,
I guess it's gonna burn either way.
you can't tell me nothing.
Well, the shots been fired, but the war ain't won. These white boys with money better learn how to run. Oh, I'll hit you back, the blood hit your tongue. You and me, baby, we're the dangerous ones. You and me, baby, we're the dangerous ones.
My daughter said if I was 18, I would have been out there doing it. So get your butt out there and vote. She's 17. She's telling me what to do. So I had to do it. Black voters matter. That fed my spirit. You know what? I'm grateful that I came out. Because I matter.
Goodbye. I'm just typing it and then realized I can say goodbye. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the video, which I didn't make. It's by 11 Films, but they do great videos. I play them frequently. Thanks so much, as always, for your time and attention. And yes, Alan, I do feel better. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Bob. Bye, everyone. Bye.